Hi everyone, I'm Mark Hayes, the Director of Sustainable and Impact Investing here at Glenmede. I recently sat down with Kathleen Biggins, the founder and CEO of Sea Change Conversations, a nonpartisan initiative focused on advancing climate literacy. We've stepped away from a formal presentation to have a more candid conversation surrounding three broad areas. First, the financial implications of legacy energy that many taxpayers don't see. Second, how federal energy shifts are being assessed by the C-suite and why some firms are choosing to act quietly, a growing trend known as green hushing. And third, the economic consequences of insurability challenges in high-risk regions and what that could mean for taxpayers. Whether you're new to this topic or looking to deepen your understanding, we hope this dialogue provides a useful perspective. So let's dive in. So Kathleen, I'm curious, you've been to 33 states, I saw in your bio. I'm curious, do you have any certain places you went that surprised you by the reaction, maybe versus what you thought going in?
Well, yeah, I think that we often make a supposition that either areas in the Northeast will be very liberal leaning and those in the South will be more conservative.
Sure.
And it really doesn't quite play out that way. You find mixes of audience in both areas. But one of the things that I thought was really fascinating was presenting in rural Rhode Island. And it was a very conservative audience. But they had heard that we had presented in Providence, and all of a sudden, through word of mouth, many people came because they were curious that they had heard this good buzz.
Right.
They had great questions, but they were very, very different than the Providence audience. In the Deep South, I would say that I have found people to be really cautious, but maybe because I'm a Southerner, incredibly generous and open and at least willing to listen and see the data. And that's all we ask for. It's like just open your ears and your heart enough that we can share with you the science, what it could mean for you and your family, what it could mean for your businesses and your economy, and what it could mean for the beauty of nature around you and your ability to enjoy the outdoors. And when we can get in, it's amazing just how universal the reaction has been. Even if they aren't totally bought in, they are always thankful and I would say appreciative of the efforts that we've taken to come to them.
Yeah, you're flagging, I think, something that's pretty important around kind of meeting people where they are and relating sometimes these more abstract ideas to their local lives. And it's this idea almost, we called it something, I think, from the boardroom to the kitchen table, this idea that as you start to see climate change actually affect your monthly bills and your daily lives, suddenly you're more bought in. I remember we were presenting down along a rural part of Maryland, along one of the shores of the Chesapeake Bay a couple years ago. And we partnered with a couple of local farmers actually that were seeing the effects themselves on that environment. And a lot of the attendees were actually other farmers that knew them and understood, and that was the big difference maker, right? Some of them actually said afterward, like, oh, seeing somebody they'd known for a long time talking about it from this way, where here's how it's affecting our crops right here and our livelihoods. That suddenly really helped, I think, drive understanding and almost openness to learning more about it versus, again, global basis. I have a big thing around. A picture of a polar bear on an iceberg, it's just not that relatable to most people around how that'll affect their lives. So I think you're hitting on something that's really important.
And I think that's right. But I think there is a lack of climate literacy. People think they know what climate means, but in fact, they don't really understand how it will translate across so many different areas of their lives and what it will truly mean for their kids and grandkids. And I think that that's a real Achilles heel for our nation right now, because it's so politicized, so much partisan fervor around it that people aren't even willing to learn and quickly come to a conclusion. And they're selling their own ability to act and to protect their families and to protect their livelihoods short, because if we take action now, there's so much that we can do. If we wait, it's so much further. But I want to touch on something that you just talked about, was the kitchen table issues, because I think this is an area that is perhaps the one that is least well understood. There is so much press around the fact that clean energy is so expensive, it dries up energy bills. But in fact, as taxpayers, we are paying for the use of legacy fuels in so many ways through those externalities that we hear bandied about. But when we pay our gas bill or we pay our electricity bill, that's only a small portion because we're paying higher food bills, we're paying higher insurance, we're paying higher health costs in general for our public health system. And those numbers are just ratcheting up. When we talk about the big numbers that groups like Deloitte talk about at the mid to end of century of losing trillions of dollars every single year in our GDP. Those are those numbers accruing, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so we're not really judging apples to apples. And I think if people really understood how much that energy costs them, they would think very, very differently.
You're totally right, and I think I haven't seen a good quantification of all of those externalities in one place. I think even if you just hone in on energy, you know, over the last month or so, there's been a lot of news and a big debate in Texas around the state legislature there around clean versus traditional energy going forward, for example. And Texas is one of the largest producers, actually, and users of clean energy in the country. But really interesting, you know, a data point has come out that, you know, if they kind of move away and they remove tax credits for the clean energy technologies going forward in Texas, actually the average consumer's energy bill in Texas will increase by about 15%. On a monthly average, right? And that's an important feature, right? People can feel whatever way they want ideologically, but when they see that number in practice and how it affects their bill, that's the important factor that we should be thinking about. So I think more quantification and, to your point, more literacy around all the effects of externalities will be important.
Yeah, I agree. And think about it, who wouldn't want to run the economy on sunbeams and wind current, something cleaner if we could do it affordably and reliably? And the new technologies that are being developed or have been developed really are enabling us to get to that point so that we don't have to give up stability, we don't have to give up security in order to move towards these cleaner energies. Sure, we're going to need fossil fuels for a continued period of time, but the faster we move off of them, the safer we will be, both economically and as a society.
So I'll ask you one more question. I'm curious, certainly if folks want to learn more about climate change and understanding all the effects of it, they can look, you know, get involved with Sea Change Conversations, I think, in a number of ways, right? But I'm curious if there's certain books, if there's certain resources that you lean on or you recommend to people that are just starting to get really interested in this topic, that want to understand the problem, but also start to understand solutions. Are there certain authors you follow, certain reporters, other research sources that, you know, anyone in our audience could kind of access?
Sure. Well, there are more books than I can even think about, but I would say that some of the sources that I look to are Canary Media, Heat Map. The Wall Street Journal has wonderful reporting on energy especially. The New York Times has very strong reporting on the climate issue and looking at it with a broad lens. One of their lead reporters actually is David Gillis, and he was a Financial Times reporter and then a New York Times business reporter before he took this new climate gig, if you will. So I think he has a really measured perspective and a business perspective that he brings to that as well. Catherine Hayhoe, who is the lead scientist at the Nature Conservancy, who is also an evangelical Christian, has a very interesting perspective on how to talk to people so that they can listen. But there are so many sources of information out there. The problem is that, honestly, people may be interested, but there is a real misunderstanding about how many others are interested, how many people in this country actually care. And because of the partisanship, because of the social kind of discomfort of talking about it, people are not bringing it up. So literally raising your voice and talking about it is one of the best ways to get connected and to help others become climate literate. So can I just talk a little bit more about the federal policies and what we're seeing? My understanding is that from the investment in clean energy, we have gotten to the point where wind and solar, even coupled with batteries together, are competitive with fossil fuels. And at the same time, they are not giving off those externalities that we spoke about before. How is that translating in the C-suite? Are people beginning to understand that and choosing it on its economic value, or is it still seen as that new upstart that we're just supporting because the liberal left are forcing it on us?
No, I would say the C-suite understands it, I think, because the C-suite focuses on financial materiality, they focus on bottom line impact to their businesses, and they focus on driving shareholder value. And from the enormous amount of research that's out there, from a lot of the cost curves that we talked about, they see that absolutely. But look, I think the C-suite has to weigh a number of different things, right? They do have to weigh this idea of what sort of alignment from a corporate level may result in a risk from a standpoint of not just the energy side. We talked about how right now, without enough battery storage, there's some intermittency problems, right? So there's that. I also think there's this idea too that I've described this space broadly around climate over the last few years as one that several years ago there was really a lot of greenwashing in the industry. Right. And greenwashing is this idea, right, of calling something green or impactful when really it's not. It's more just marketing spin. I'd say we're in a new age now that I'd describe as green hushing, which is this idea that actually corporations, when we're talking to them from investors, they're doing just as much, if not more, than they have ever before, right? Because they see the bottom line impact of being able to gravitate in this way. It's just that they're not actively talking about it or marketing it right now because of all of these, the politicization of these issues. Look, a good example is insurance companies. Insurance companies have decided that they're not going to insure wide swaths of Florida, wide swaths of California. I wouldn't say that insurance companies are known to be a super morally focused sector as a whole, right? They are the ultimate bottom line, a bunch of actuaries crunching the numbers. Their numbers are showing them that they need to take action here. That's how I would summarize and describe a lot of the C-suite, where they see this, they're concerned about it, they're making sure their businesses can weather these risks, but they are a little bit cautious, perhaps rightfully so, because their job, again, is to make sure they're not opening themselves up to a lot of reputational risk or sentiment risk by shareholders. They're not talking about it as much. But I will just tell you, I feel optimistic and I feel really constructive on the space based on the conversations and what we're seeing from management teams, even in this environment.
So let me probe that question or your comment on insurance a little bit more, because what we are reading from certain very senior insurance leaders is that the system is in danger. That in fact, if they have to pull out wholesale or whole cloth from not just Florida and California, but maybe Louisiana and parts of Texas, and guess what? Hail is getting more severe, so the rates even in the middle of the country, which you would think would be very safe, are going up as well. But if indeed we no longer have that support of insurance in these big geographical blocks, how significant could be the downward spiral of the economy writ large?
Yeah, so there's a couple things to think about should that happen, right? And yes, you're right that a lot of parts are uninsurable. The reinsurance industry, right, that is stepping up and historically looked to fill gaps, right, in some of these areas, they're also pulling back in certain areas. So I think what you're talking about is, okay, well, how does this play out? Could there be wide swaths of the population where it's either uninsurable or prohibitively expensive to live somewhere and get insurance? Right. There's a couple different options, right? One could just choose to live there and have economic loss if a storm occurs, or there could be migration trends towards places that are insurable. I think something to consider too is there a different sort of body that could come in and fill that gap in practice? And folks have talked about state level or federal government level having to come in and plug that gap in practice and that cost flowing to taxpayers. Look, I think your point earlier around all of the externalities and how over time taxpayers will absorb this cost in different ways, that would be one way in practice that one could see, and there have been conversations around this in certain states around like, okay, should the state be stepping in to fill some of these gaps in practice for its population? Yeah, if it's a wide-scale problem, that could, again, flow up to the federal government or be one of those contentious debates where it says, okay, well, it's a free market and folks can move if they don't want to live there, right? But we all know that folks below the poverty line ultimately could be the worst affected on this, where it may be a little bit harder just to pick up and move.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. So let's get back to the C-suite for 1 second. We are seeing federal policy being turned on its head. I mean, there was this focus on moving towards a cleaner, greener economy, and we are now seeing the current administration and perhaps the legislature doing a U-turn, pushing us back towards legacy fuels.
Yes.
As a business that needs to look out 10, 15, 20 years, given what is happening globally and pushing forward this clean tech revolution, if you will, that's across so many sectors, but of course even in energy, that provides companies potentially cleaner energy, safer energy, and cheaper energy. How much of a reversal do you think big companies will do given the pressures of the administration's actions, and how much will it be staying the course, keeping the eye on the long-term horizon?
I think it's more the latter, but I do think it's important that there may be tweaks around how a company is thinking about this from a global standpoint, even where they're thinking about pouring in resources or building out teams and planning from a global perspective, right? You know, if positioning around the clean energy side is a big part of your approach, and even including as investors, right? I'll tell you how we think about it. Certainly we are making tweaks to our exposure around how much US clean energy exposure that we would recommend in a portfolio over the next several years, because frankly, not only does the policy look quite negative, what we know for sure is that it's uncertain, right? And that's just really difficult to plan for any corporation, but certainly as an investor, we don't like uncertainty. So for us, and I think a lot of corporations are thinking this way when they're thinking about technological development, right? And again, where they want to focus their time. As the US retreats from clean energy, and it certainly is, right? At least in this administration, that does open up opportunities in other parts of the world. You think about Europe, right, and a big part of Asia, even parts of the Middle East. I was reading about the UAE and a lot of their commitment towards sustainable finance and climate as they look to diversify their mix. Those are regions that are pouring capital into these technologies, and a lot of corporations, particularly all of the large ones, they're global operations, right? They need to serve a number of different customer bases and go where the opportunity set is. So I would expect, again, more opportunities over the next few years. Again, under this policy backdrop, to look and go out towards Asia and Europe. And I think something that for all of us to think about is, look, perhaps there's a world 10 years from now where the US now is looking to catch up, right? But some of that will have left the station. And some of this we may be just kind of conceding in terms of who is the leader in, let's say, electric vehicle production going forward, right? Who is the leader in small, fast reactor nuclear technologies? Look, it might not be the US, even though we've developed a lot of the IP behind those. The actual scaling of that may be elsewhere.
I thought we were going to end on an optimistic note, but you just brought me down. But thank you so much for giving us your time.
Yeah.